1,212,123. Hey guys, welcome to What If Naruto Was Death's Vessel. Like and subscribe and comment part 2 if you want more of the story. Summary: the Kyuubi chakra was split into two halves and sealed into Naruto's sisters, the Yang into Urza, and the Yin into Mito. But there was another being there that night, and three possible hosts. Minato was able to survive the sealing by changing the seal at the last minute, not realizing his mistake until years later. Chapter 1: Happy Birthday. Naruto sat in his room glaring out the window into the training field out back of his family's house. The curtains were mostly closed and the lights were off. The room itself was mostly bare, almost clinically so. The only things present in the room was a bed, desk and dresser. More so, everything inside it was white, and it looked to have been cleaned so obsessively that there wasn't even a speck of dirt. Looking around, he couldn't help but frown as he looked around. He hated the color white. It was too bright and clean, like everything else in his life. Naruto was one of three children, triplets in fact. Turning back to the window, he once again looked out, watching as his sisters trained. Mito continually hit and kicked a training dummy, their father Minato watching on from the sidelines, occasionally calling out pointers to her or words of encouragement. He could see the pattern of her moves, could almost hear the beat her hits were making as they hit the training dummy. On the other side of the family training ground, he could see his other sister Urza. She, unlike Mito, was moving through a number of swordsmanship stances wielding a wooden sword in her right hand. Kushina, like Minato, was stood on the sideline, smiling as she directed her training, teaching her different stances as she did so. Both of his sisters looked like mini versions of their mother with the same long red hair and light purple eyes, but unlike Kushina, they had 3 whisker marks on each cheek. Mito was dressed in a baggy white shirt, red shinobi trousers. To finish this off her outfit, she had white bandages wrapped around her hands and wrists. Urza, on the other hand, had taken a recent liking to wearing armor, with a blue shirt beneath her armor and heavy metal boots as opposed to traditional shinobi sandals. But while they both looked like mini versions of Kushina, the resemblance was nothing compared to how much they looked like each other. The only way to tell them apart was their clothes, and sometimes their hairstyles. There was a reason why Naruto was sat sulking in his room whilst his sisters were outside being trained by their parents Minato and Kushina. The reason for this separation began almost 9 years ago. On the night he and his sisters were born, the Kyuubi, the 9-tailed demon fox, had been forcibly extracted from his mother, who had been left weak from giving birth to both Naruto and his 2 sisters. Luckily, Minato had been prepared and been able to reseal it before it could do any real damage to the village. He had also been able to seal just enough of the chakra in the air into his wife in order to keep Kushina alive, despite having had the Kyuubi removed from her. When it came down to sealing the Kyuubi again, Minato wasn't able to seal it back into his wife, as in her weakened state it would kill her. Instead, he had to seal it in his own children, who due to their Uzumaki heritage were the only ones who could safely contain the beast. The fox was therefore split in half, with the Kyuubi's yin chakra being sealed into Mito and its yang chakra being sealed into Urza. His sisters were chosen as they were healthier and stronger than Naruto, who was born the smallest of the triplets, the runt of the litter, so to say. Because of this, both his sisters needed training from a young age in order to control the demonic chakra that was contained inside their bodies, along with the violent reaction that came with it. Naruto had seen them lose control once from his window, and both had been little more than wild animals until his parents slapped a seal on them to put them down and help them regain control. Unfortunately, though Naruto had not had a part of the Kyuubi sealed into him that night, he had not been left unaffected from that hellish night. Though unlike his sisters, he didn't get a power boost from the effects of that night. According to the doctors, the Kyuubi's chakra had affected both Naruto and his sisters' bodies while in their mother's womb. Mito and Urza weren't affected by it because they had the Kyuubi sealed inside them, their bodies having its chakra to fight the effects. Something Naruto did not have. They didn't even have a name for what Naruto had, and he really hoped they didn't name it after him. The problem Naruto's body had supposedly developed from exposure to the Kyabe's chakra at such a young age, was that it only converted around 20% of the food he ate into nutrients, making it so that no matter how much he ate he was always starving. His body was painfully thin and weak, and because of that Naruto tended to be constantly fatigued and tire very quickly. The doctors had actually expected him to have died before he reached the age of 2, and were shocked when he passed what they called the danger age. While they claimed he would never be completely healthy, they also said that he wasn't going to just keel over and die without warning. However, despite having got past the danger age, that still didn't stop his family from treating him like glass, like a strong wind would make him break. This had led to his parents developing an overprotectiveness when dealing with Naruto, something his sisters had also picked up. Therefore, while his sisters were being trained by his parents to be ninja, Naruto was forced to simple watch, and if he even looked like he might ask for training, they would give him this look. Like the mere idea of him training terrified them. They always said they would train him when he was older and healthier, that they needed to focus on his sisters because of the fox, but Naruto knew they were just trying to placate him. They never intended to train him, at least not unless he gave them no choice. Instead, they probably wanted him to remain a civilian and stay safe behind the walls of Konoha for the rest of his life. Unlike Mito and Erza, who took after their mother, Naruto took more after their father Minato. In fact, in the same way his sisters looked like their mother, Naruto was a near exact copy of his father. He had the same golden blonde hair with random spikes sticking up in every direction, and the same blue eyes. At least he would have been if he wasn't so thin and pale. His skin was so pale it had an almost gray tinge to it, and was wrapped so tight around his body you could see the bones. His eyes also seemed dimmer than his father's, almost lifeless in fact. Like his sisters, Naruto had 3 whisker-like birthmarks on his cheeks, though said cheeks were sunken in. There were also dark rings around his eyes, making it look like he constantly had a pair of black eyes. Despite the fact that his room was white, Naruto's clothes were quite dark, making his skinny, unhealthy figure stand out even more. He wore a pair of black shinobi trousers, a gray t-shirt that despite being so small was still baggy on Naruto's body. And over the top he had a thick black hoodie with the hood pulled up to cover his hair. This was mostly so that his skin was covered, leaving only his face and hands uncovered, as no matter where he went he always felt cold. With a small grunt, Naruto turned away from the window and closed the curtain fully and plunging the room into complete darkness. Yet despite this, Naruto could still see perfectly as if the room was full of light. Naruto always hated bright light, it hurt his eyes and burned his skin. He much preferred the dark, where he could see even if other people couldn't. Moving to his bed, Naruto quickly got on his knees and reached under it, pulling out a scroll a moment later with a sigh. It was a scroll he had taken from his father's library, a very important scroll even if the information it held wasn't considered hard to find. The scroll contained the method to unlock a person's chakra system, giving them access to the energy running through their body. If his family knew he had this, they would undoubtedly take it from him. His father thought he was too weak to try and unlock his chakra, and didn't want Naruto to even try for fear of him getting hurt. His mother would be more than happy to never even let him leave the house again, and if she had her way Naruto would be forced to walk around in a bubble. Mito and Erza were no better than their parents, and despite them being the same age treated him more like a little brother. Naruto had been studying the scroll for the last week, making sure he understood everything. He didn't dare try and unlock his chakra in the house while his family was around through. His mother was a sensory type after all and would be able to feel him unlock it if she was nearby. That was why he had been waiting for today, or more precisely tonight, to finally go through with it. Tonight his parents would be out of the house, leaving only his sisters for Naruto to get past. While Mito was starting to show signs of being a sensory type like their mother, she was inexperienced, and wouldn't be able to tell if he wasn't in the house. She would however feel it if he unlocked his chakra, which meant he would need to get out the house without them knowing. Naruto found his right hand moving to his pocket, absently palming the kunai inside it that he had stolen from his sister Urza's room. He would unlock his chakra and finally prove to his family that he wasn't as weak as they all believed and that he could actually be a ninja, just like them. It had been easier than usual to sneak out of the house, not that Naruto was complaining. Both Mito and Urza had been busy reading some scrolls that their mother had given to them, and they had been so invested in their scrolls that they didn't even notice him sneak past. Ironic that the son they thought was incapable of being a shinobi could sneak past his already in training sisters. As soon as he was out of the door, Naruto sprinted to the fence at the back of the training ground, aiming for one specific part of the fence behind a bush. By the time he reached it, Naruto was panting, his pallid skin flushed red from his brief attempt at sprinting, so much so that he had to lean on his knees for support. It was times like this he really hated his body. Quickly moving behind the bush so he was out of sight of the house, Naruto took a moment to get his breath back before glancing back to make sure no one had seen him. When he was sure no one had seen him, Naruto turned his attention instead to the fence, pushing on the bottom of a particular plant and smirking when it moved. Quickly squeezing through, Naruto paused just long enough to make sure it closed behind him before running off into the forest that took up the space behind his family's home. The shadows between the trees soon covering him as he disappeared from sight. For the next half hour, Naruto slowly made his way further away from his home and deeper into the forest, only stopping when he found a small clearing and could no longer hear the sound of the village behind him. Licking his dry lips, Naruto sat himself down in the middle of the clearing on a rock with a flat surface, taking the scroll out and unrolling it as he did so. Naruto was about to start reading when he heard a noise coming from one of the trees around the edge of the clearing, and faster than his weak body should have been able to. He pulled the kunai out of his pocket and threw it towards the place where sound was coming from with deadly aim. He had spent hours learning to throw that kunai while his parents were training his sisters, and it seemed to finally be paying off. He watched as what looked like a hawk fell out of the tree, the kunai having hit it right in the center of its chest. As he walked over to retrieve his blade, Naruto also noted with dull curiosity that its left wing had broken when it hit the ground, but didn't think any more about it as he wrenched his kunai out and wiped the blood off on the grass. Looking at the broken body of the hawk at his feet, Naruto couldn't hide his curiosity. Having lived such a sheltered life, he had never actually seen a body before. It therefore took a great amount of effort for him to tear his attention away from the sight before him. Finally returning to his previous position on the rock, Naruto turning his attention back to the scroll and slowly started to form the hand seal it said was needed to focus his unlocked chakra. Closing his eyes, Naruto turned all his focus inwards, looking for the streams of chakra, as the scroll called them, running through his body like water. He started by feeling around his stomach for the swirling pool of chakra, where all the small streams were supposed to run to and from. It was supposed to be the easiest part of his body to find because it was also the biggest, followed by the head and then the heart. Slowing his breathing as he went deeper and deeper into himself, the world outside slowly started to fade away from his senses and Naruto found himself in a world of darkness. It was cold and dark. Nothing around him, and Naruto was starting to worry when it didn't change. This was supposed to be where his chakra was stored. The scroll said it should have been a blue light flowing like water in the darkness. Panic starting to set in, Naruto's mental image started to turn in every direction as his breathing picked up. Looking around desperately for any sign of light until finally he stopped and just seemed to shrink into himself. His family was right. He was too weak to be a ninja. He couldn't even find his chakra, or worse yet, he had so little it was invisible to him. Naruto was ready to give up completely at that moment and was about to leave, when something in the dark suddenly grabbed his wrist. It felt like a hand, but it was hard as stone and as cold as ice. He could almost feel the bruise forming under its grip as it started trying to pull him even deeper into the darkness. Eyes widening in fear, Naruto tried to pull away from whatever it was that was holding him, the darkness hiding it from him. But it was too strong, its grip unyielding as it pulled him down. This was impossible, he was in his mind. Nothing else should be in his mind. Naruto wanted to scream, but when he opened his mouth no sound came out. Finally the thing let go of his wrist, Naruto quickly hugging it to his body as he tried in vain to see what had been holding it. He turned in every direction, unsure of what was up or down at his moment as his eyes shot about looking for any more movement in the darkness. However, instead of movement, Naruto's eyes found something else. Something that made his heart skip a beat and tears form in the corners of his eyes. Light. Not blue like the scroll had said it would be, but a dark purple ball of light surrounded by what seemed like red lightning. It almost reminded Naruto of an egg, but as he got closer it got larger and larger. By the time he was only a few feet from it, the egg looked to be the size of the Hokage Tower. As he slowly reached a hand towards the crackling red outline, Naruto noticed that his hand and arm were bleached of color, like the negative of a picture. All thoughts of whatever it had been that brought him here were gone from Naruto's mind, all his focus was on the light as his hand slowly inched towards it. He let out a slight gasp as his palm hit the light and it turned out to be solid, with the texture of ice-cold glass. Naruto pushed against it slightly and was surprised to find that while it still felt as solid as glass, it gave slightly under the pressure of his hand, almost like it was rubber. Pushing a little more, Naruto soon found the limit and frowned before trying to use both hands. It gave a little more until there was an indent about as deep as his elbows, before it pushed back and Naruto was thrown away slightly. He tried again, only to be pushed back again as a deep frown grew on his lips and he started pounding against the light with very little success. Your knife. Use your kunai. Spinning around in fear, Naruto strained his eyes looking out into the darkness, trying to find what had spoken. The voice had sounded odd, like dry leaves in the wind and had sent a shiver down his spine. But no matter how hard he looked there was nothing. No movement, just darkness stretching out as far as his eyes could see. Slowly turning back to the egg, Naruto reached into his pocket and pulled out the kunai. How he still had it when he was in his mind Naruto didn't know, but at the moment he really didn't care. Licking his lips, Naruto pushed the tip into the surface of the egg, feeling as it resisted slightly before cutting through. Smiling as he started using the kunai to cut a line through the light until it was almost as tall as him, before quickly putting the kunai back in his pocket. Not giving himself time to overthink what he was out to do, Naruto pushed himself through the hole he had just made in the egg and plunged headfirst into the light. For a moment Naruto was overcome with a feeling of absolute peace, warmth flooded his body and for the first time it didn't make him uncomfortable. All the aches in his body he had grown used to for as long as he could remember were being soothed away, all pain and sadness gone. Only to be replaced by new pain. It hit like a hammer, slamming into his body and knocking the wind out of him. Burning. He was burning from the inside. He could feel as the fire burned its way through. Something, like veins inside his body that he had never known about and didn't carry blood. His mouth opened in a silent scream as his fingers dug into his body trying to get the fire out. Naruto was burning for a few seconds, before finally his mind could take no more and he simply blacked out. When Naruto woke up he knew he was back in his body in the real world, mostly because of the feel of the cold stone under him. He pulled in deep, wheezing breaths as he used his hands to push himself up into a sitting position. His body ached more than he could ever remember it doing, and although the fire was no longer raging through him he could still feeling something moving around in its place. When he finally opened his eyes the world was spinning, or maybe it was just his head. He couldn't think very clearly yet. the memory of the pain running through his now numb body was clouding his thoughts. Yet at the same time he was aware of everything around him, the sweat dripping off his skin and hitting the rock underneath him. The wind pushing its way through the trees and their leaves, whistling as it passed his ears. He could feel every living thing in the forest around him. He could feel the birds in the trees, the deer moving as a group not 100 meters from where he was. Naruto could feel every insect in the grass and under the ground. He knew the exact number of every ant in 3 different colonies in the clearing around him and could feel as they worked tirelessly. A beehive hanging on a tree to his right, thousands of bees flying in and out in a constant stream. It was all just so much. Slowly Naruto started to calm down, pull himself together to the point that he could think somewhat clearly again. If he stayed out too long, one of his sisters might decide to check on him. And if they found out that he wasn't there, they would go straight to their parents, who would probably form a whole search party to find him. That was the last thing he needed. Slowly getting to his feet on legs that felt like water under his weight, Naruto was about to start making his way home when he noticed something odd. There was a smell in the air, a delicious one at that. Looking around, he tried to find the source of the scent, his mouth beginning to water slightly. Finding the source, his eyes locked onto the dead body of the hawk he had killed earlier. As his eyes locked onto the corpse, he found himself slowly approaching the bird. At first he had trouble focusing on it, his eyes blurring slightly, but the more he tried to see it clearly, the clearer it became. He could see a faint outline shimmering around the corpse of the bird. The outline was in blue, and somehow he knew that that meant it was dead. Even as he watched an orb of light begin to force itself out of the body of the hawk, the orb of light slowly beginning to hover above the corpse. Unknown to Naruto was the fact that his eyes were adjusting to the point they could see the life in things. His irises had turned a crimson red color and his sclera had turned a dark black color. When added to his usually thin and pale appearance, it gave him a distinctly unnerving look. For about a minute Naruto had just stared at the ball, transfixed by the pale light it gave off, even as it shined in his eyes, unaware of the changes he had begun to undertake. Or even that he had been slowly walking towards it. Then Naruto was suddenly struck with a craving, his mouth dry as he licked his lips. He didn't know what this thing was, if it was dangerous or some kind of jutsu he had never heard of, but there was one thing he did know. The pale blue egg made out of light was the most delicious thing he had ever seen, and he wanted nothing more than to eat it whole. Slowly reaching out towards it, Naruto wrapped his hands around the orb and pulled it towards him. As he brought it closer to him, he began to giggle in delirious happiness. Bringing it up, Naruto opened his mouth as wide as he could, not realizing his mouth had opened to twice what should have been possible, and shoved the egg in. For a moment Naruto feared he was going to choke as he tried to swallow the orb of light. The orb, however, seemed to get stuck in his throat. But then he felt it moving, and when it passed his windpipe, the young blonde took in a deep breath. Then he felt it. The moment the orb hit his stomach, Naruto felt his chakra increase ever so slightly, a cold sensation spreading through his body as it seemed to dissipate inside him and add to his reserves. He felt as the new pathways he had just opened pulsed, and couldn't help the pleased sigh that escaped his throat. This was the first time in his life that Naruto's body didn't hurt. He had done it. He had unlocked his chakra. Now his family would finally see that he wasn't weak, and that they would have to train him just like his sisters. He could be a ninja just like his father and protect the village. Licking his lips, Naruto opened his eyes to reveal that they had returned to normal. Turning in the direction of his home, he started walking towards it, a slight skip in his step as he headed home. By the time he had gotten home, the adrenaline rush from activating his chakra had worn off. And the moment he reached his bed, Naruto collapsed onto it and was asleep within moments of his head hitting the pillow. The next day Naruto was woken up by the sound of someone banging on his door and calling his name over and over again. And though it took a moment for his mind to fully wake up, he easily recognized the voice of his sister Urza and let out a groan. He didn't hate his sisters or anything, though they weren't as close as they had once been. When they were younger he did everything with them. Hell, he would go to them if he had a nightmare in the night instead of his parents. But then they had started training and he was left out, and their parents refused to even consider letting him join them in the training. That had been about a year ago, and since then he had become distant from both Urza and Mito. Not that either of his sisters actually noticed. No, they were unsurprisingly too busy training to actually realize he was being left out of things. It wasn't fair that they were being trained while he was being treated like glass, and even though they tried to spend time with him, they were usually too busy with something to do with training. But that was going to change now that he had unlocked his chakra. I mean, now he had access to his chakra, he could train with them. Then there was the fact he wanted to ask his parents what that weird orb thing he had swallowed last night had been. Though he had to say that the fact that he had done something so stupid as to unlock his chakra like that by himself did actually scare him looking back at it. His back clicking as he got out of bed, still dressed in the clothes he had worn last night, Naruto moved to the door and opened it. He was a little surprised to see that not only was Urza standing on the other side but Mito was there as well, both of them smiling at him. Mito was the first to step forward and pull Naruto into a hug, though the blonde was annoyed when he noticed that she was being overly gentle with him, still treating him like he was made of glass. "Happy birthday, Naruto," the two girls chorused as they smiled down at him. It took a moment for the words to sink into his head, though he did notice Urza taking Mito's place and hugging him as well. "Birthday?" Naruto asked, a frown of confusion on his face as he looked at the girls in front of him. Both girls frowned at him, Urza stepping back from the hug so she was once again next to Mito, placing her hands on her hips as she did so, doing it in a way Naruto had seen their mother do. "Really, Naruto? You should get out of your room more often if you don't even know it's our birthday," Urza said, a disapproving look on her face as she looked down at Naruto. "If I had a reason to leave my room more often, maybe I would," Naruto said somewhat uncomfortably as his eyes shifted between the two similar-looking girls. His comment was met with uncomfortable silence, both girls suddenly looking guilty. Maybe they weren't as clueless as Naruto had first thought, they at least realized what he was hinting at. But as quick as it came, the moment was gone and Mito was bouncing on the balls of her feet and grabbed his arm, pulling him out of his room and towards the stairs as she did so. A large smile on her face as she unceremoniously dragged him downstairs. "Come on, Naruto, get your ass into gear. Mom and Dad are waiting for us downstairs. Don't forget we still have to get everything ready for our party. Everyone is coming," Mito said excitedly as she continued to pull Naruto after her. Urza running after them, a look of disapproval once again on her face as she saw how giddily Mito was acting. Naruto's face darkened slightly at the mention of the party, not that either of his sisters seemed to notice as he whispered under his breath. "You mean your party?" Naruto said bitterly. Throughout the day Naruto had tried to talk to either his mother or father with little successes, at least beyond them saying happy birthday. When they weren't telling him to eat to help keep his strength up, they were moving around the house setting up everything for when the clan heads and their children arrived for the party. Since they were young, the clan heirs and the Namikaze triplets had been forced to interact with each other, their parents trying to ensure they would all get along when they were older and running the village themselves. Naruto was sure the fact at least all of the main clans had children the same age was not a coincidence. However, out of all of the other clan heirs, the only one their age that Naruto ever actually got along with was Shikamaru, and even then, they only ever really played shogi together. And even then they did not play it that much. Shikamaru was currently winning their little competition at 24 wins to Naruto's 17. But according to the lazy boy, he was the only person outside his clan that had ever actually beaten him, so that was probably good. He did, however, get along well with Itachi, the oldest of the Uchiha children. While they didn't speak often, the few times they did, Naruto enjoyed his company, and the older teen was probably the only person that didn't treat him like he was completely made out of glass. His brother Sasuke, on the other hand, was a whiny little mummy's boy that followed his brother around like a shadow. Unfortunately, he was also one of Urza and Nito's friends, so he was around more often than not. Naruto was still trying to talk to either both or even one of his parents when the party started. And it was all but hopeless then because they were too busy talking and socializing with the other adults. Naruto just found a quiet corner of the room to sit in and watch as his family moved around the room, laughing and talking to everyone. No one seemed to even notice him other than Shikamaru sending him a nod with his usual bored expression on his face. Though he thought he saw his sisters sending him odd looks out of the corner of their eyes. "Happy birthday, Naruto." A calm and stoic voice spoke out from behind Naruto. Slowly turning to look at the person that had walked over to him while he had his eyes closed. Naruto let a small smile cross his lips when he saw the ever-stoic Itachi moving over and taking the seat next to him. "Hey Itachi. Thanks I guess." Naruto replied softly, his eyes still scanning the party going on around him. It was strange really. Here he was sat in middle of a party that was being thrown for him, but yet he felt like a stranger. The two quiet boys sat in silence for a few minutes after that, both simply watching the other people in the room until the older teen finally decided to speak again. "I see you found that scroll I recommended. I can sense the chakra flowing through you now. It is odd though as something about your chakra. It feels and looks odd, unnatural almost." Itachi said, a speculative look on his face as he looked at Naruto. Looking at the teen out of the corner of his eyes, Naruto wasn't surprised to see his eyes flashing red with his Sharingan as the older boy stared at him. It was true, Itachi had told him which scroll he needed to find to unlock his chakra, not that anyone other than the two of them knew this fact. While everyone else saw him as nothing but a weak, sick little boy, Itachi said he saw Naruto's potential and that he wanted to help ensure that he could actually reach said potential. He told Naruto what scrolls to read, recommended different training methods that he would be able to do until his body was stronger, and even showed him the proper way to throw the kunai he stole. Making sure not to look like they were doing more than exchanging pleasantries after seeing his mother glancing in their direction, Naruto not answer verbally or immediately. Instead he gave Itachi a small nod. "I was able to sneak out last night and unlock it. Though it wasn't exactly like the scroll said, it did push me in the right direction." Naruto finally replied to Itachi, an inquisitive look on his face as he once again tore his gaze away from the party, instead turning it onto Itachi. "Good," Itachi said simply. It was then that Itachi reached into his pocket and pulled out a fist-sized scroll, placing it on the younger blonde's lap as he did so. "Your birthday present. Your room looked a little bare the last time I saw it, and I thought you might like something to put on the wall," Itachi said, his voice as calm and toneless as usual. Raising an eyebrow at the teen's words, Naruto unrolled the scroll to see the kanji for the words, "underneath the underneath." It was a popular saying in Konoha to look underneath the underneath to find the truth, and was actually one of his own favorite sayings. There was a little string on the top so it could be hung up, and Naruto was sure Itachi had written it himself. However, it was what was on the back of the paper that really caught his attention. A small smirk crept onto his lips as he saw what was on it, before he forcibly pushed down his smile. On the back of the scroll there was a storage seal, small enough that it would go unnoticed unless you were looking for it, and set out so that it would be completely invisible when he hung it up. Naruto already knew that his real present was sealed inside it, most likely so his parent or sisters didn't find it and try and take it off him. That was probably why Itachi had asked about him unlocking his chakra. He wanted to make sure Naruto would be able to open it later when no one was watching. "Thank you. I think you might be right, and my room could do with a little personality," Naruto said, the smile once again coming to his face as he did so. The only response he received in reply was a nod from the older boy, before Itachi stood up silently and walked off without a word, not even looking back at Naruto as he did so. The next hour or so was mostly the same as the first one was for Naruto after Itachi left. Though his sisters and a few of the other clan heirs had come over at one point or another to engage him in conversation. They did not stick around for long though. Naruto was not really that surprised, he did after all know that he made the others uncomfortable. They didn't know how to act around him and were often worried about offending his sisters or even his parents by saying the wrong thing. His usual sickly appearance had that effect on a lot of people, both kids his own age and the adults. He was the son of two powerful ninja, one of which was the Hokage himself. And with him being so weak and looking so sickly, it just didn't fit in with their idea of what a son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki should look like. Even his godfather Jiraiya acted weird around him, if not outside tried to ignore him. The pervert would spend most of the time during his visits either talking with his father and sisters, or perving on his mother only to get his ass kicked. Even now Naruto saw the man's face was swollen after probably getting a beating either from his mother or some other woman, who had no doubt punched him for making a comment about their bodies. It did not seem to affect him as he was still smiling and talking to people as if nothing was wrong even as he started turning purple from the bruises that formed. Naruto was about ready to head up when the sound of a glass ringing reached his ears and he turned to see his dad in the middle of the room. His mum stood next to him with a large smile as everyone turned to look at them. "Attention everyone, I have an announcement. Urza, Mito, could you come over here for a moment?" Minato said, a large smile on his face as he gestured for his daughters to join him. Naruto watched with narrowed eyes as his sisters moved to stand in front of their dad, getting up from his seat and moving closer so he could see, as the crowd started to block his view. He went mostly unnoticed though even as he watched his dad kneel down in front of his sisters while their mother continued to look on with a proud expression on her face. And when he saw it, Naruto felt a hollow feeling begin to form in his stomach. Now after talking it over with your mum, and seeing how much work you have been putting into your training, we both agreed you are ready. So first thing tomorrow, I am going to start teaching you both the Rasengan. Happy birthday girls, Minato said, a happy expression on his face as he saw the joy on his daughters' faces. The room soon burst into cheers as Mito and Urza both started grinning and ran over and hugged Minato, Kushina soon bending down and turning it into a group hug. Naruto felt the hollow in his stomach get worse, the feeling spreading and his heart beginning to beat faster and faster, the room beginning to spinning around him as it did so. He saw Itachi watching him while leaning against the wall to his left with his usual blank expression, his eyes flashing red for a moment as if waiting to see what Naruto was going to do. When the room finally did stop spinning around, Naruto could only feel numbness for a moment, the feeling spreading throughout his whole body momentarily, only for it to be rapidly replaced by a cold rage. Naruto went to step forward only for someone to grab his arm and hold him in place, and he wasn't overly surprised to see it was Shikamaru. The usually lazy boy was giving him a worried look while his hand gripped his arm in an iron grip. Shaking his head slightly as his eyes moved from Naruto to his family as they pulled away from the hug. "It's not going to change anything, Naruto, just let it go," Shikamaru said, his tone serious as he continued to hold Naruto back. For a moment Naruto thought about listening to his friend's words, the rational part of his mind telling him Shikamaru was right and that kicking off right now in the middle of the party would not change a thing. But the other part of his mind, the part that was consumed by his anger, was louder. Jerking his arm from Shikamaru's grip, Naruto turned his glare on the boy and snarled slightly. However, what he didn't know was that as he glared, his sclera started to bleed to black and his irises started to blaze a deadly crimson red. The young Nara's eyes widened in shock and he backed away in slight fear, but in the time it took him to blink, Naruto's eyes were back to normal and he was moving towards his family. It wasn't until he was stood right in front of them that Kushina noticed him, by which point he had set his face into a blank expression. For a moment he saw her eyes widen at him, like she suddenly realized he was there before they moved to the others, then back to him. He saw the flash of guilt in her eyes, but it was only there for a moment before they seemed to harden with resolve. Naruto dear. Kushina began, her voice quiet as she reached her hand out to him.
Nigga.
Naruto, however, didn't give her the chance to make an excuse. Are you going to lie to me again and claim the Rasengan as part of their training to help control the fox's chakra? Naruto asked, his voice harsh. Though not overly loud, as he was aware that he did not want to draw too much attention to what was happening. His words, though despite being spoken quietly, did manage to get around the room, those who were standing closest to the group turning so they could watch the ongoing drama.
That's crazy.
Not that it really bothered Naruto though, as he could see it was making both his mother and now his father uncomfortable, quite uncomfortably.
Nigga.
Naruto, please, we can talk about this later.
No.
Kushina said, her voice still quiet as she looked around her nervously. No. Naruto said, his voice rising slightly as he did so.
That's crazy.
Now everyone's attention was on him, including his wide-eyed sisters. You always say we'll talk later, or that you need to focus on Urza and Mito's training because of that bloody fox. I've had enough, or your lies. I've had enough. Just tell me the truth. You were never going to train me, were you? Naruto said, beyond caring, as he vented the anger he had been building up all these years. Silence, heavy and thick silence settled throughout the whole room as Naruto's voice carried across the room. Naruto could see the adults sending each other looks. Yet no one seemed surprised to hear his allegations against his parents. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Minato stepped forward, standing between Naruto and the rest of their family and sending Naruto a sad look as he sighed. Naruto could also see Jiraiya moving to stand next to his father, his face stern but mostly blank. You're right, Naruto. We never intended to train you. But you have to understand why. Understand that your condition makes it too dangerous. Your body is too. Minato began to say, crouching down slightly so he could talk to his son on his level. Weak. That's what you think, isn't it? That I'm weak? Naruto said, his ire increasing as he gave into his childish fit of anger, which was not surprising really, as he was actually a child. The words seemed to hit his family like a physical blow, making his father Minato flinch while Kushina, Urza and Mito looked away from him. Finally it was Jiraiya who snapped, stepping forward and staring at Naruto with an impassive face that made the young blonde's body tense. That's exactly why, kid, you are weak. Your body is not strong enough to go through the strain of shinobi training, you can barely carry yourself from day to day. It's time you saw the truth, Naruto. You will never be a ninja. Jiraiya said, tired of all beating around the bush. It was time someone told the boy the truth. It was the best thing for everyone involved. Naruto had started taking steps back the more Jiraiya spoke, his words ringing in his head over and over. The tears he had been holding for so long finally started to escape his eyes and stream down his face as people backed away from him. No one seeming to be able to look him in the eye as he ran from the room. Chapter end. Hope you enjoyed the story. Subscribe for more. Peace.